Hi, we are the ADHD Skills Lab podcast. My name is Skye,
And my name's Sarah.
and we will be your hosts, chatting to you about practical ADHD strategies you can use, the research behind some of these strategies, as well as interviewing other professionals with ADHD about how they've developed skills and working through struggles in their lives.
You might know us from Unconventional Organization, where we talk about this kind of stuff all day long. So we're super excited to have you along, and we're going to chat through it together.
Today, we are with Eric Tivers. Eric Tivers is a trained, licensed clinical social worker turned coach, as well as the founder and CEO of ADHD Rewired, which I'm sure you've all heard of. Since 2014, he produced over 500 episodes of the podcast, as well as building a network of ADHD-based podcasts. Eric earned his bachelor's in social work at Bradley University and his master's in social work at the University of Illinois. He is also the dad to a neurodivergent 12-year-old, a self-taught musician, and a pickleball enthusiast, which I had to look up because I'd never heard of it, but it does look fun. So welcome, Eric.
Thank you so much. And you can add to that list, obsessed with motorcycles as well. That's my new hobby as of last year is
Oh, wow.
riding. Yeah.
Have you had any accidents on the motorcycle? Because my family here are also pretty obsessed. My brother-in-law has a motorcycle as well. So I'm just interested to hear.
Not knock on wood, not yet. So,
Good. That's awesome.
I'm hoping to keep it that way.
Yeah. That's the key. So where are you based in the US?
I'm in the Chicago area. So just northern suburbs of Chicago.
Nice. I think there's a number of people there who work in the ADHD space. Very cool. And you work closely with so many ADHD adults. So I'm really excited to talk strategies and tips with you. But before that, I actually wanted to know a little bit about your ADHD journey and how you ended up starting the podcast and then founding the organization as a whole. So when were you diagnosed with ADHD?
I was diagnosed when I was 19 after a pretty disastrous first year of college. And that very first semester being away from home, I got a 2.2 GPA. And, but I would say I was earned because I didn't really do much studying. It was more partying.
Yep.
And with the threat from my folks to say, like, hey, if you don't get those grades up, like, you are coming home because we're not paying for this tuition. It's like, all right. So, I worked really hard that semester and I really studied, found the library, did all the things that I'm supposed to do. And I did worse. I got a 1.8.
Wow. That must be tough. Yeah.
And, so fortunately I was able to convince my folks for just like, give me one more shot here. And they did allow me to get one more shot. And during that summer, I met someone who I was talking with, and she was telling me about that she was diagnosed with ADHD, and she was sharing with me what that was like for her. And it was like big light bulb moments of, wait, that's what ADHD is. And it was like someone was speaking the language that I thought only internally, in the way that she was experiencing the world and some of the challenges that she had with like organization and time management and reading. And it was just like, oh my God, someone's like describing me.
Yeah.
Right at the very start of my second semester, I made an appointment with the University Health Center. I got an evaluation. Or the psychiatrist that did the evaluation said, wow, like you were not identified as ADHD. How'd you make it this far? It was like and inattentive scale, like off the charts kind of. So I got a diagnosis. I was prescribed Adderall. And I kind of view life kind of pre that moment and post that moment because it was
I can imagine.
It was a game changer, right? It really was. It was this experience of, oh, like I can focus. I can actually read and know what I just read, which was I remember the first time I took medication, like that was one of the biggest wows for me, was like realizing how much my mind really like typically wanders while reading, and was able to read a chapter of a book and like I know what I just read because I was just thinking about the words I was reading instead of like 1,000 other things.
So I'm so curious now. How did you get all the way to 19 without being diagnosed?
I have no idea. I mean, it's when I think back to stories from being really young. So there's a story of me in preschool. I told my mom that I don't think my teacher knows my name. She's like, well, what do you mean she doesn't know your name? Of course she knows your name. The teacher's probably calling my parents regularly to that's concerned about my behavior. I said, well, I don't think she knows my name because, she keeps calling me Don't Eric. Uh-huh.
Oh gosh.
Right. So 5 years old, also Disney World. I mean, there's just so many things. I mean,
Yeah.
in first grade, I remember like this shameful experience. My mommy called to the school after school one day because my desk was such a disaster that like the
Yeah.
teacher emptied my desk in front of my mom. And just like, there were just so many experiences
So
like that
many
growing up.
things. Yeah. But if you don't know what they connected to, if there's no expectation that they could be connected to anything, it's just don't Eric. That's
Pretty
what you,
much.
yeah,
Pretty much.
yeah.
And my diagnosis when I was young was lazy.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, well, if you're interested in it, you could do it. Like, because you put all this effort into the things that you like. It's like, well,
Mhm.
yeah, that's what
Yep.
they call ADHD.
It's so true. And yeah, that whole idea of you get diagnosed with something, even if it's not ADHD, somebody picks it up and says, this is who you are. And that is so true. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did have an IEP, but it was for like a learning disability, which I'm not even sure is
Right.
accurate. Like, I definitely have
Right.
some math stuff. I discovered very late in life that I also like dyscalculia.
Oh, yeah. I have dyscalculia as well. That was the one thing. They were like, how did you not? I went and studied for my doctorate and I did the test for dyscalculia and they stopped the test. They were just like, you have it. We won't make you take this test anymore. That was how bad it
Uh,
was.
and I didn't discover that myself until I was in business for myself. And like,
Yeah.
I was entering credit card numbers on the machine, and like it kept saying invalid number, invalid number. I had asked my now ex-wife at the time, like, "Will you just watch what I'm doing?" And she's like, "You keep swapping these numbers, like every time you put it in, like this is."
Yeah.
And I discovered it's particular with like patterned numbers, so like something that's like 4889. I will like
Mhm.
reprocess that to type it in as 4899. So I'll like
Yeah.
double number. I'll switch which is the double. Oh my gosh! Like, how did I not figure this
It's
out?
crazy. It is crazy. I will say with the dyscalculia, this is a bit of a tangent, but I had to pass a basic math refresher test as part of my postgraduate statistics. That test I barely passed. And then I did well on the programming. They were like, now we're going to give you the hard stuff. And then that was the one I did well at.
That makes so much sense to me because, like, in undergrad, I only passed stats I took stats over the summer, community college. I couldn't pass it at like,
Yeah.
university. And the only reason I actually passed the test was like, I met this teacher, his professor was like awful and barely even knew English. Like, not even like hyperbole. Like, he was still learning English and would confuse what isn't. And when you're doing stats,
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
changes everything. The final exam, he literally put the answers in the back of everyone's test and walked out of the classroom.
Oh my
Like, I'm not even kidding you. Like, looking around, we're like, should we get something wrong just so it doesn't look like I need every point I can get in here. I'm choosing
Yeah.
that.
You're like, I
But
got
then in
past-
grad school, when I took research methods, which is all the applied
yeah,
stats,
yeah, 100%. Yeah.
I was really into it. Like, 'cause it gave
Yeah.
me the why, it gave me the context. Like, I was like, oh, there's a utility for this.
Yeah, no, 100%. Dyscalculia is something that I'm interested in, but there's not enough information at the moment. But it's very, very cool. Yeah. So in terms of the ADHD, bringing it back to,
Yes.
to
Bring it
ADHD,
back.
although for those of you who have dyscalculia now you feel heard, you're welcome. So how did you move from learning about your own ADHD to wanting to share what you learnt with others? Because that's a big shift.
Yeah. Well, no, it was a kind of a journey. I did well the last 4 years of college. I was in the 5-year plan. And then I did well in grad school. So in between my undergrad and grad school, I worked at a therapeutic day school. I was first working with kids that had like emotional and behavioral challenges.
Mhm.
And then I started this autism program. And I just fell in love with kids who were just like really, really challenging behaviors. But like, I
Yeah.
was so intrigued by it. My brain was like, whoa, what is this? And so,
Mhm.
as someone who like my brain gets turned on by stuff that's like complex and challenging, and I just seem to like get it. And so when I went back to grad school, I wanted to focus on autism. And so I did that. I studied to be a school social worker. I found that I did not care for the school politics. I'm kind of too
Mhm.
opinionated, don't do well with biting my tongue very well when I think that's
Mhm.
something to be said.
Mhm.
And apparently that's a skill that you need when you're working in a political system. So fast forward, finished grad school. I was the clinical program manager for a residential group home. Then I got a job doing applied behavioral analysis with more like higher functioning kids with autism
Mhm.
and a
Mhm.
little bit of ADHD. Really fell into working with some of those kids who were just like way smarter than you and
Yep.
and have the social skills to let you know it. You know,
Yep. Yep.
I loved working with those quirky, clever kids. And then I was doing that for about a year and a half. And then I got laid off. And prior to that, I had just recently got my clinical licensure so I could
Mhm.
do private practice, which I was always planning on doing. I just didn't think I was going to be doing it that soon. Yeah, but just was the same week that I got laid off. I got laid off at the very end of the week. At the beginning of that week, my now ex at the time, we had just signed our paperwork for our first mortgage. We just bought a house. And so now,
Oh my gosh, everything's happening.
yeah, so I have a mortgage and no job.
Yeah.
I started my own clinical practice. The focus was high functioning autism and ADHD. So I did that for a number of years. And then I started the podcast, ADHD Rewired. I didn't have a grandmaster plan on this podcast. It's funny when I think back at it now. Like I literally started a second business, but I didn't even like realize that's what it was at the time.
Yep. Yep.
So I'm like dabbling in this online stuff. I'm learning all like this online marketing. I start the podcast. And then I like just had this idea. I'm like, what if I do like a group? Because at the time, I was seeing a therapist for some of my like ADHD stuff. And I was doing this thing that I think a lot of people do when they're in therapy, if they actually do the homework that they're assigned. And what I was doing, I was getting to my therapy appointments like 20 to 30 minutes early. So I could sit in the car and do the homework that I was supposed to be working on all week, right before my
Yep. Because that's that's how they expect you to do it, but that's how you do it. Yeah.
And I was just like, man, it just felt so frustrating because I'm like, it's not that I haven't thought about it. Like, I think about it throughout the week, but without that like immediate kind of accountability, a week is forever away.
Yeah.
So I started looking, I'm like, there's got to be something where I can get more like real time, more immediate accountability for sort of the day to day. Cause like I know what I want to be doing,
Yeah.
but I'm not doing it. Right.
Yeah.
And so I looked and looked and looked, and there was literally nothing out there. So I created these online intensive coaching and accountability groups. I created something that wasn't there that I saw there was a need for. And that's how it sort of all evolved. Like I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Like it was just like I saw this need and I'm like, how could I solve this problem?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. So at that point, did you have any business experience or were you sort of like, let's do this and then let's figure out how businesses work?
I mean, if you count like selling like blow pops in like middle school and selling like
I absolutely count that. Yes.
selling tie dyes and beer on like fish tour, like when I was in my early 20s, like
yeah,
sure, that's my business experience. But beyond that, not really. No.
Yeah.
But I'm always as very kind of entrepreneurial kind of ethos.
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, I started this business because I was like, I have ADHD. I want to figure out ADHD and I have a PhD, which I'm supposed to be focusing full time, nothing else. And then, well, what's one more thing? So exactly. Yeah, it's 100% that. But I'm curious because you decided to disclose your own ADHD and you didn't have to. There's a lot of people I know who work in those clinical spaces who on the down low, they have ADHD or they have something or they suspect they have something, but they decided not to disclose because they didn't want to, particularly at the time. I think it was even more unusual. So what was it about your experience that made you want to disclose?
Well, it's interesting. When I first started my practice, my sort of disclosure, like at least on my website, was very like, if you read it between the lines, you could kind of pick up on it. But it was like, I was not explicit saying I have ADHD. It was when I started the podcast that I, really fully kind of came out with it. It was really early on too. I got an email from someone that their email said, "Oh, it takes a lot of balls to share what you did." And I was like, "Oh God!"
You're like, it does. Oh my gosh!
What did I share? Like, oh shoot, it's out there now. But what I found is that people found it really comforting to know that this person understands what I'm going through because they're going through it too. I don't know. It was, I guess, comforting. And there was an episode I did during the first year that I was just a hot mess. Like I was almost at episode 50. I was like getting ready for the launch of my second season of coaching groups. I was just like, the workaholism was just like in full effect. Like it was,
the burnout was coming.
I was doing like 90 to 100-hour weeks. I was hired to give a talk to the school district on the same week that I had all this other stuff to do for registration for the coaching groups. And I was like, oh my God, I don't have an episode to go. And I was almost at episode 50. And I was like, what am I going to do? I'm going to like miss my streak. Like I was that sort of inner oppositional tendency of most people don't make it past 25. And if I do that, like it's at 50, and I'm like, oh yeah. Like, and so I was so determined, like it's not missing out.
Yeah.
So I grabbed my recorder and I just brought it in the car with me. driving to this presentation.
Wow.
And I kind of call it an auditory MRI of ADHD. I don't think I finished a single sentence. I was like, oh man, I don't know if I should release this. This is not putting me in a real good light,
Yeah, yeah. You're like, now hire me for all of your
right? And the what was so pleasantly unexpected was just the feedback and the impact that that episode actually had
Wow.
in so many ways, not just for the I think people listening, but from the feedback from it, it helped me realize that like, oh, like, I don't actually have to have like it all together.
Mhm.
It's okay to be a little bit of a mess sometimes, which in this very sort of ironic way, the less I have to stress about making it look like I have everything together, the less my ADHD actually impacts me.
Because you're not masking. You're
Right.
doing less
That's
masking.
exactly
Yeah.
right. That's exactly right. And it helped me with a lot of my sort of perfectionistic tendencies. I was like, oh,
Mhm,
this doesn't need to be perfect. Well, dang.
mhm. You're like, well,
Yeah.
there goes all that extra time I would spend on it. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't remember what your question was, but
No,
I hope
I
that
mean,
was
you've
helpful.
answered it. It's great. Yeah, I really appreciate it because I think I always like to ask people who are public about their ADHD about how they disclosed and what that experience was like because you'll know it's a question that you get so often. And I was listening to a recent podcast episode where you talked about the idea that you used to say, I wouldn't necessarily disclose at work. And now maybe moving into more like, well, see how it goes. And it's very much that it's tough to disclose. So for people who have, I always like to ask about that process.
Yeah, no, it's my last two jobs, I mean, it was a while ago, but like I disclosed when the writing was on the wall that I might be like
Hmm.
facing some kind of like performance improvement plan because I was behind on all that paperwork or
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff like that. Like I was a good clinician. It was the paperwork
Yeah.
that killed me.
Yeah. Yeah. And then ironically, sometimes when you do disclose, it adds to the paperwork. Now you have more paperwork.
Yeah, for sure.
If you like what you're listening to, then please subscribe. It really helps other people find out more about the ADHD Skills Lab podcast. So, in terms of kind of your own routines and ADHD strategies, what are the strategies that you have kept coming back to, the ones that feel like fundamentals for your life?
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned routine. It's like I do kind of look at routine as kind of like the holy grail for managing ADHD because, when we have routine, we don't have to be taxing our executive functions as much. So, like my morning, like I'm pretty regimented in the morning. And it's interesting. There's been some other things going on too, but like it's so much so that I've been kind of wondering, like, is it possible that I'm on the autism spectrum somewhere, maybe? And it's like, as of this moment, I don't actually have a definitive answer to that. It's something I'm actually still
Yeah.
exploring
Yeah.
because I was thinking, wow, I'm like so regimented because a previous partner of mine would like, we were talking about mental flexibility because with my son and her kids, like,
Mhm.
we're all struggling with mental flexibility. And so, like,
Mhm.
and I said, yeah, I think I'm pretty flexible. She's like, oh yeah, you are like when I cut the strawberries for your breakfast differently than you like them. I was like, well, there's a right way to do it. No.
Yeah, your partner knows. They'll call you out.
Right. And so I was like, oh, maybe I do have some rigidity in this area. And so I've been like, for a while, I'm really kind of thinking about that. Like, is this part of like an autism piece? And I was just recently occurred to me, I'm like, I actually don't think so. I'm sure, but I don't think
Yeah.
so.
Mhm.
I think it really has been these strategies that I've developed to really help me not have to make decisions in the morning, to like just
Yep.
routine, Listen, I have like basically the same thing every morning. And I kind of do the same thing for lunch too.
Yeah.
Um,
Same, by the way, actually. Yeah. Now that you mention it.
and I get pretty thrown off if something interrupts the routine. So that's really helpful for me. Morning exercise is also huge for me. It's really amazing. If I miss a couple days of working out, and that just exacerbates my ADHD, like my anxiety gets higher, which then, it's a kind of this big
Yeah.
domino.
Hmm.
So the exercise, I'm pretty good about doing my planning. And I think part of it is this idea of creating a sort of a strategy-based life,
Yeah.
right? And learning how to sort of bend the world to you because like the world doesn't bend the other way, right? And so
Yeah.
it's like figuring out, all right, what is it that I need in my life to make all the things that could be easier? From having an assistant, an executive assistant, to I have a cleaning person. Actually, just recently brought it to do weekly. He was every other week. And I was like, you know what? It is like the most joyous. Like, I totally get it's an element of privilege that I can do
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
But man, is it helpful, right?
Yeah.
Like, if I never have to do my own laundry again, like, I would think that I kind of won the lottery because I
Yeah.
tell you, I hate doing laundry because I never finish it. Like, I'll do
Yeah.
it and then
That last thing, the folding, the putting away.
the putting
Yeah.
away in particular. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's like it all gets mixed together. It's like, crap, what was the clean basket? What was the dirt? I'm like, oh, God. And so it's like that kind of stuff. So it's that recognition of understanding, like, I know what I'm good at. I definitely know what I'm not good at.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
trying to get as much help around the stuff that I struggle with, focus on what I am good at. Even just things like if you were to call me on my phone and get my voicemail is going to tell you, don't leave a message. Like, if you want to talk to me,
Yes.
schedule something on my website. Cause like I live on
Yes.
my calendar. Like, if it's on my
Yeah.
calendar, it's going to happen. If it's just like, hey, call me back. Yeah, if I do call you back, you should go buy a lottery ticket that day.
Yeah.
To me, it's the importance of ownership of both the struggle and the strength. Like, it's both equally important.
Yeah, and doing it with a level of humor and understanding as much as possible, as much as you can. I know it gets easier over time the more you connect with other people with
Yeah.
ADHD as well. So I have a question specifically. You mentioned planning, and this is specific, but I'm just curious. What days do you plan? Is it every day? Is it in the mornings? Like, when are you planning?
I'll be the first to say, like, all the stuff that I even teach, like my coaching program, I don't always do. And I tell people
Yep.
that 'cause it's important to know, like, what I do is I always come back to the basics when I've
Mm-hmm.
slipped. I slip, but I bounce back. I keep bouncing back. So what do I do? When I'm on my game, I do a longer stretch of planning on Sundays. Because when you're regularly planning and you're not you're not missing days, daily planning is typically for me, it's about a 5-minute process.
Mm-hmm.
When I've slipped from it a bit, it's a longer process because I got to kind of
Yeah.
really get into that flow of,
Mm-hmm.
all right, so what were my goals for the year? And now I'm trying to, all right, what
Mm-hmm.
do I got to do this month? So I'm on track for that. Um, so for my day, it's somewhere between a 5 to, sometimes up to a 20-minute planning process. Earlier on, when I was really trying to figure this planning thing out, I found like doing a really like strict kind of 20-minute a day planning. I thought
Mm-hmm.
was really helpful. And then one of the things and I've kind of found this irony of creating this really strategy based life is I actually try to create a lot of streamlined systems in my life, which ironically then actually requires less planning. So I'm not actually like doing all these different things. So I'm doing a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of different things. I need to really plan and really be
Yeah.
detailed about my planning.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I can't keep track of all the stuff I'm doing. But
Mm-hmm.
when I really have very intentionally narrowed my focus so much so, I know what I need to be doing. So it doesn't require that much planning until it
Right. Yeah.
until it does. And then I'm like, wait a minute. I'm dropping balls here. I'm forgetting stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's this kind of balance of like, all right, I got to stay on my planning, but it's also like really trying to have a lower level of complexity in my day,
Mm-hmm.
which then just makes it easier all around.
Lower decision making, like you said, that idea of reducing decision making. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you a physical planner or a digital planner or a combination of both?
So I'm a combination of both. Or as far as calendars, as much as I love paper calendars and miss them very much because I like when I had clinical practice, it was just me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It was just me, and I like to be able to write in the margins, and I like.
Mm-hmm.
But as I have people on my team, and I want people to be able to schedule it with me, it's all digital, it's all online as far as my calendar goes. As far as my like to do list goes, it just depends on the day in the week. Sometimes lately, I've been using a notebook. Sometimes I'm using Asana. Sometimes I'm using
Mm-hmm.
sticky notes. Sometimes I was using a dry erase board. And one of the things that I've discovered is that so I have my sort of my goals for the year in one spot. And each month I'm going there and kind of like looking at, all right, what do I really want to be focusing on? But recognizing the value of novelty. Like,
Yeah.
because I was using Asana for a long time. And then I was just like, wasn't paying attention to it. It almost became too complex. And I was like, ugh, I don't even want to look at this anymore.
Yeah.
So, as someone who loves technology, and I think I probably have tried every single like to-do list app that ever existed and discovered all the same issues with every single app, and then
Mm-hmm.
realizing, wait a minute, it's
You're
actually not
using
the app.
every app.
That's right. That's right. You got it. Uh-huh. Okay. So it's not the app. As easy as it can be to, grab the phone, using your digital assistant. and it's say, remind me, blah, blah, blah. You still have to do the thing, right? It doesn't do it for you.
Yeah, I
Um,
hate that part
yeah, me
sometimes.
too. Me too. Um, so it's really just being intentional. And I think one of the things that I learned too is the importance of language in our to-do list.
Mhm.
Because
Yes. Yeah.
we'll sometimes like write kind of almost like shorthand, and I call it
Mhm.
like we're writing noun sense when people just write like doctor.
Yeah.
I know what I meant when I wrote it, but now I'm looking at it, I have no idea what it means, right?
Doctor question mark. That's
Right.
also fun. Yeah.
Yeah, so looking at like not even just starting your to-dos with verbs, but I call them vision verbs. So the idea of can you actually see in your mind's eye the actual action that needs to be taken? And I think that a lot of people will use what I call pseudo verbs.
Mhm.
Things like look up or find out. Like,
Yeah.
what does that actually tell you? Because it doesn't actually,
Yeah.
like, Google is a great verb, right? That's telling
Mhm.
you where is the context of that action. Instead of a talk to you, it's like, all right, how are you going to talk to you? Is it a call? Is it a text? Is it an email? So it's really being very, very specific about like the actual action and then looking at the contingencies. So that if this, then that. So, because
Mhm.
it's so often, this thing about adulting in our to do list, often when we finish an item on our to do list, it often just creates another item.
Yes. It's like a long string. Yeah.
And sometimes if I'm not sure what the next action might be, as part of my to do item, I'll even put, all right, identify the next action step. Or I was thinking, like, if this, then that. So if this happens, I want to do that. If that happens, then I want to do that. Because often contingencies in real time can freeze my brain, right? I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. I'll call you back, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
but if I thought about it ahead of time, then it's like, oh, okay, like that took maybe an extra 30 seconds to figure out.
Yeah. And you can do it on those days when you're like, especially if you have a planning day and it's a Sunday and you've had, a beverage or whatever, and you're like in a good space to come up with those kind of ideas.
Yep. And other things I'll include the why. Why do I
Hmm.
want to get started? What's the impact? Why does this matter? Right? Because so
Yeah.
often it's the what, but like, we are passion driven people. Like when we have a
Hmm.
why connected to our what, it's going to make it way easier to
Yeah.
actually follow through on that.
Yeah.
And the other piece that I add to it is I'll make time predictions on how long I think
Hmm.
those tasks will take me. And sometimes I'll also include effort predictions, like
Yeah.
how hard do I think this task will be? Because that will kind of tell me on a given day or given week, all right, like I had good sleep, I exercise, or I can tackle some of those harder tasks. I have more stress, or this I haven't slept well, or whatever. Like I didn't like my EF is not going to be as high as I want it to be, so I might not tackle some of the higher sort of
Hmm.
demands type tasks.
Yeah, no, that's so great. I'm just thinking about my own calendar now and the adjustments because I think having the why is so important because I've definitely had situations before where there's a task and I look at it and I go, that why is now redundant. Like if I thought about why I'm doing that, that's not a thing anymore, but it's there on my list and I'm just doing it.
I'd like to tell people that just because it's on your list, like it doesn't get squatter rights. Like you can kick an item off the list. You added it there, like good. Like be generous about putting stuff on your to-do list, but I'd say be even more generous with taking things off. And
Yeah.
because we have, you familiar with CRS?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a family-friendly language-based podcast. So if
Oh,
you
we
can't
switch
remember,
it depending on who's on.
also
Yeah.
can't remember stuff, you can blame your
Yeah.
other.
Yeah.
So if we take something off our to-do list that we're not going to do, so a lot of people are like, oh, but like it feels like this shame piece of like just to
Hmm.
do something. I'm like, you're gonna forget it was ever there in like 30 seconds. Just take it off.
It's also a good feeling. It's like half completing. You're like, I didn't complete this, but it isn't necessary anymore. So it's kind of like it got done by something.
You know what? One of my favorite things to do as far as when I start my planning process is I go through like what are the items that are on my to-do list that I've actually already done and I just forgotten to cross off.
Hmm.
What
Hmm.
items that if I'm being really honest with myself, I'm probably not going to do it. And just start there.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
less is always more. So if you can start
Yeah.
with less, you're going to get the stuff that's actually important then.
Yeah. No, 100%. 100%. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So many strategies. I'm definitely going to listen to this again and take some more notes. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about with you was the community, because I think you, over the years, like you said, you started out kind of doing this not ad hoc, but it was sort of like, oh, this grew. But as you went, you built a community. So you built a community of people that you talk to and work with. You also built an internal community of people that you work with in the business. So how has that whole community developing and driving what you do today?
So much of what we do is community based because I think
Hmm.
that we all know all these different ideas, like don't struggle alone. The idea like the Me Too experience. I mean,
Hmm.
there's something that is just so profoundly powerful about doing this work within the context of community. And I think that when we can see ourselves in others, we tend to be generous with our sort of assumptions of how other people are doing. And when we hear people being hard on themselves, we're like, we let them know that like you're being really hard on yourself, like you're doing all these really great things.
Yeah.
But we have a harder time sort of giving that generosity to ourselves and that compassion
Yeah.
to ourselves.
Hmm.
What happens when we're doing this work sort of in group settings that we start to sort of see ourselves in others and then realize the impact of some of that like negative self-talk and some of the
Hmm.
that lack of
Yeah.
self-compassion that we often have for just ourselves. Because the way I kind of describe it is like doing group is kind of like there's like a dozen mirrors looking back at you, but
Hmm.
maybe for the first time, like there's not judgment looking back at you, right? It's like
Yeah.
full acceptance and like recognize that, you know what? Like, sure, there's stuff that I suck at, and I'm just going to say it. Like, I suck at certain
Hmm.
things, I screw up certain things, but there's also lots of things I'm really good at.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, they start to recognize, okay, like it's okay that like I have certain things that I'm just not good at. And
Yeah.
recognizing and actually allowing yourself to step into and own, I'm actually really good at this, that, and the other thing. Let me spend more time there instead of just beating the crap out of myself for the things that,
Hmm.
I think I quote unquote should be able to be good at.
Yeah, no, that's so important. I mean, by yourself, that hall of mirrors is kind of like funhouse mirrors. You're just looking at yourself, but everything looks weird and it doesn't make sense.
Uh-huh.
And the clarity of other people to be able to be like, that's a lot of things that you did this week. Even just something like that. Think you didn't do anything, but actually, no, there was a car accident that you had and you had to get insurance, and then this and this happened. And that might be why you didn't do the 100 things on your to-do list.
The other thing I find too is that so often people with ADHD, they think it's just them that aren't getting everything done on their to-do list.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think it's really important that people hear this. Nobody gets everything done on their to-do list,
Yeah.
including
Yeah.
neurotypical people.
Yes.
We just tend to think it's just us,
Yeah,
but it's not.
100%.
Which is why I think it's so important that we are. One of the things we in our my coaching groups, I have our members read the book "The One Thing" by Gary
Mhm,
Keller. It's not an
mhm.
ADHD focused book, but I think it's one of the best books that really helps break down the idea of how do you actually prioritize. Right, because like prioritization is really hard with ADHD because our brain tends to just think whatever is like nearest to us, loudest, around
Yep.
us. That's the thing that we prioritize, right? It's
Yep.
it's priority based on proximity, which is an awful way to actually prioritize, right?
Mhm.
So with the idea of the one thing, it really looks at what's the one thing you can do that's going to make all the other things easier or unnecessary. And so it really helps you identify what's the first action step to focus on to have the greatest impact, but then also kind of zooming out and what are the things that I could be doing in my life that's going to make all the other things I wanting to do in my life easier.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. And I think that's so relevant because I did want to ask you about prioritizing, but you just answered my question. It was like the one thing I wanted to ask about with the strategies. So yeah, that's an excellent strategy.
Another thing too, it's like, so there's that they call it the focusing question in the book, The One Thing.
Mhm.
There's another question that I like to ask myself, and we use this in our community. It's sort of this little variation of this question because we've all had those days and even those weeks and sometimes those months where we had all the things we needed to do and we didn't get any of it done. Like we've all
Mhm.
had those periods
Mhm.
of time, right? And so asking this question, if I could only get one thing done today or this week or this month, what would it be? It kind of plays differently in my mind. Right.
Mhm.
And I think it's for a lot of other people too. I think in some ways it's similar to like when you're decluttering. It's like
Mhm.
sometimes it can be hard to know what to get rid of. But if you flip it and say, all right, I'm putting all of this in the garbage bag. Now I have to choose what am I taking out of the garbage bag? Like
What are we
what do I actually
saving?
want to keep? It just happens to resonate differently for a lot of people.
Mhm.
And so much of what we do too, it's like we gotta be like professional experimenters to figure out what's gonna work for us.
Yeah. And we're good at that, thank goodness, with ADHD, generally speaking.
I think for a lot of us, we are. I think those who do really well and I see thrive are better at embracing the idea of experimentation. I think those who struggle more they just want to figure out the one right way to do it. And they like desperately want that way to stick forever.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I wish that was a thing, but it's just not.
And that's why acceptance is so important. If we can accept,
Yeah.
you know what? Like this is working for now.
Hmm.
Like I have no assumption that the stuff I'm doing that's working right now is going to work in a month from now and a year from
Hmm.
now. Like so
Yeah.
I'm always mindful of like, all right, like just constantly reevaluating. Like, is this
Yeah.
working? Not. What else could I try?
Yeah. No, 100%. 100%. Well, we're getting to the end of our time. So I'm just going to ask you some of our ADHD Skills Labs questions. These can just be short answers, but tell us about one professional achievement that you're most proud of.
So as of this recording, tomorrow I think we're coming out with episode 489. So I think by the time
Hmm.
this actually airs, we'll have hit episode 500, which is
Congratulations.
thank you. So that's awesome. And we served over 1,000 people in our coaching community. The fact that I really love the work that I do and get to play in my work in a sense, like
Yeah.
I'm proud of it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And on the flip side, is there a professional failure that embarrasses you? How did you deal with that?
Oh, that's how much time do we have? Um, as I've been growing the business, I have this sort of vision of myself as this really great leader, but like having your own self-concept of a great leader and actually
Mm,
being a good leader are two very different things. Earlier on, I had a wonderful coach who was working with us who left because I like was not being the kind of leader that she needed.
mhm.
I wasn't hopeful enough. Like I was kind of letting her do her thing, and she needed more support,
Yeah.
and I wasn't providing that. So it's really understanding how to lead a team, and
Mhm.
especially virtually, I've been finding it to be harder than I thought it would be. I've definitely have invested some in my own coaching. And actually last year I took part in a business accelerator program with wanting to get more help with some of my leadership. And it was more focused on systems. So it really wasn't the right program for me. It was
Mhm.
super expensive and
It's
like
really tough with those business programs. They don't tell
oh
you what's in them, and then you try it and you're like, "Oh."
yeah, I'm like, well,
Yeah.
that was an expensive lesson. It's the people stuff. It's the how do you grow a business where basically everyone in the business is also neurodivergent, right? And so you have
Yes. Yeah.
that adds a whole other like, level of complication. It also adds a level of like ease and like familiarity and comfort. But like as running an organization, you also like have to have your people accountable to do what they said they were going to do.
Mhm.
Those are some of the challenges. I mean, I can certainly list more. It's
That's all good. I like to ask that question because I know and you know that there's so many things, but I think from the outside perspective, they can be like, oh, Eric, he's never made a mistake in his life. It was just one shot all the way.
I always tell the members of my coaching groups, I'm like, I just want to be really clear about something just because I think sometimes people, they want to join my groups because they kind of put me on this pedestal of like,
Yeah.
Eric's got it all figured out. I'm like, please, I don't have it all figured out.
Hmm.
I might be, a couple steps ahead of you because I've been doing this for a while, but like, I got ADHD too, and sometimes my ADHD wins as well. So this idea that like, oh, like he's at 500, podcast episodes. Yeah, I'm like, yeah, and I've also struggled with perfectionism, like big time, and
Hmm.
workaholism, big time, and
Hmm.
and I've had a lot of lessons learned.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And then the final question is if you had an ADHD life motto, what would it be? You could just probably pick from one of an amount because I'm sure there's lots.
You can choose to do work that you love. Like work doesn't have to be super hard, and I think that's a really important part of managing
Yeah.
ADHD is recognizing that like we're adults. We can make decisions on the types of things we are willing to do. And I get it. There's privilege in that. But if you're in a position where you feel like you can't do that, asking yourself that question, all right, what would you need to do so you can position
Yeah.
yourself, in your future so you can do more?
Yeah. What's the one thing this week that you could do?
Yeah, it's be easy on yourself. You've only got one life. You're not meant to just be all about work. Enjoy life too. I think that's really important.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, thank you, Eric, so much for taking the time to share your really interesting strategies and your story with us. It's been great to talk to you. And where can
Thank
people
you.
find out more about you and what you do?
At my website at ADHDrewired.com. I'm on most of the social channels as well. But that's probably the best place to go to find out about our coaching groups. We also have a virtual co-working community. We can find out about the podcast there. And if you're, since you are listening to a podcast right now, listening to this, you also search right on the app that you're listening to this right now on for ADHD Rewired.
Awesome. It's been great to have you on.
Thank you, Skye.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to reach out or connect with us, you can leave us a message at admin@unconventionalorganization.com.
You can also find out more about our ADHD coaching organization, read our free articles, or sign up to our online courses at unconventionalorganization.com. That's organization with a Z or an S. They both will get you there.
If you'd like to learn more about what we discussed here today, or you want to read the transcript, you can find that at our show notes page at unconventionalorganization.com.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and think someone else might find the strategies and stories helpful, the best thing you can do is share episodes using the share button in the podcast player, or leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify or your podcast player of choice, letting them know why you've benefited from this podcast.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you back in the ADHD lab next week.